years after the historic March on Washington, we go back in history with John Lewis, who spoke that day a half a century ago. Congressman Lewis was the youngest speaker on the platform that day. 14-term congressman and civil rights icon, he is currently the only living speaker from the March on Washington. Join me as we welcome Congressman John Lewis. Congressman Lewis, welcome to Growth Talk. Thank you so much for coming on the air today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I want you to talk to me about the March on Washington. We know that the March on Washington by 4 was one of the largest political rallies on human rights in America. Take me back to August 28, 1963.
August 28, 1963 was one of those historic moments in American history. All across the American South, but all across America, there have been a series of nonviolent protests. There was a growing sense of discontent. People have been arrested and jailed and beaten. And we felt a need to go to Washington to petition the Congress and the President of the United States for change, for civil rights legislation. I would never forget that morning of August 28, 1963, when the leadership of the March on Washington went up on Capitol Hill and met with the congressional leadership on both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans. We came out on Constitution Avenue, started walking toward the Washington Monument, and we looked toward Union Station. There were hundreds and thousands of people walking. They were already marching. And so the leaders was like, there go my people, let me catch up with them. They were already leading us. And we arrived at the Lincoln Memorial. The music started. The program started. It was a day that was hot, but in a real sense, it was a very inspirational day. People were well dressed, especially the older people. Many of the young people were dressed casual, but many of the old people were dressed like they were on the way to church. The women, some were wearing hats, long dresses. Many of the men had suits and ties. People were fanning. 10 of us spoke. I spoke number 6. Dr. King spoke number 10.
Wow. So Congressman Lewis, what was it like being there with Dr. King, speaking on that platform with him that day? What was it like?
Well, on that day, when it came my time to speak, a man by the name of A. Philip Randolph, who was the Dean of Black Leadership, who had been trying to organize the March on Washington since the 40s, presented me. He said, I now present to you young John Lewis, the National Chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I went straight to the podium. I looked to my right. I saw all of these young people who have been working in Alabama, in Georgia, in Mississippi, and all across the South. Then I looked to my left, and I saw all of these young people, young men, black and white, up in the trees, trying to get a better view of the Lincoln Memorial, of the podium. Then I looked straight ahead and started speaking. And I was happy and glad that my speech was finished and it was over. And then I listened to other speakers and the music, and then when it came time for Dr. King to speak. I've heard him speak so many times, but I think on this day, August 28, 1963, he transformed those marble steps of the Lincoln Memorial into a modern-day pulpit. He preached a sermon. And when he got to that point where he said, I have a dream today, a dream in keeping with the American dream, he lifted all of us. There were people encouraging him. It was like being at church. But they were saying, they were yelling, go on, preach. And when he finished, he knew that he had gotten over. And we were ready to come back to the South, to go back to Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee and continue the struggle. But when the march was over that day, President Kennedy invited us back down to the White House, he stood in the door of the Oval Office and he greeted each one of us. He was like a beaming, proud father. He was almost giddy because he didn't support the march in the beginning. He thought there would be violence and chaos and disorder. And then he shook our hands. He said, "You did a good job, you did a good job." And when he got to Dr. King, he said, "And you had a dream."
My. And Congressman Lewis, I was reading, preparing for today, and I read up one where Dr. King had went to Washington a few years before the March on Washington. Why do you think the March on Washington speech, "I Have a Dream," was so powerful? Because he went back in, what was it, 1957? It was.
You're right. In 1957, I remember it. I was 17 years old in 1957, and he led what he called a prayer privilege. And a lot of the religious leaders and ministers, they wore their robes. And it was on the anniversary, one of the anniversaries of the Supreme Court decision of 1954. And in that speech, he kept on saying, "Give us the ballot. Give us the ballot, and we would do such and such a thing. Give us the ballot." Because in the South, people could not register to vote simply because of the color of their skin. And so because of what was going on all across the South, people felt that we had to go back to Washington. And people were ready to go and take a message to members of Congress and to the President of the United States. But I think Dr. King had been inspired by God Almighty to draft the "I Have a Dream" speech. And some of it he just ad-libbed. It was coming out of his spirit, out of his heart, out of his soul.
With the recent Supreme Court decision on voting law, what does that say about our society today?
The recent Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act says, in effect, that we're not there yet. In spite of all of the changes, in spite of all of the progress that we've made as a nation and as a people, we still have a distance to go. The Supreme Court, in my estimation, put a dagger through the very heart and soul of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It means that we still have work to do. And there are forces in America that want to take us back to another period. And if it hadn't been for the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the March on Washington, the struggle of so many people, we wouldn't have made the progress that we've made so far.
Congressman Lewis, by the same token, we have a black president, and you said you would never thought you'd see the day in your lifetime to have good for the country. What is your opinion on President Obama and what he's done for this country in his last 2 terms here as president?
I think this president has been very good for America. First of all, I think we must take note that Barack Obama is the president of all of America. He's not just the president for people of color, but he is our president, and people must respect him and support him. But some people on the other side of the aisle made a decision on the evening that he had been inaugurated that they would not cooperate with him, they would not work with him. They were determined to make him a one-term president. If my mother were around, she would say that this president has been called everything but a child of God. He is strong, he's solid, he's smart, he's gifted, he's given us hope. A few years ago, after he was elected, I was in Europe visiting different countries, and I was in Germany. And I came back and I said to the president, and I said, "Mr. President, if you were running for re-election in Europe, and especially in Germany, you will win by a landslide." It's strange to me that people all over the world, whether it's in Africa or Europe, people support him. They see him as a symbol, as a person of hope. And he struggled and worked very hard every day. But there are people who will not cooperate with him. They want to take us back to another period. You hear people saying, we want our country back. Back where? Do we want to go back to the days when people couldn't register to vote simply because of the color of their skin? Do you want to go back to the days when people had to pass a so-called literacy test, pay a poll tax, or to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap, the number of jelly beans in a jar? The president is saying, we don't want to go back. We want to go forward and create one America. And it doesn't matter whether you're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American.
Congressman Lewis, what can we do better as a country to join force as President Obama, as he ends his term as second term as President of the United States? What can we do better to help him and aid him in making his term a success?
Well, I think the voters, the citizens, must contact their senators and representatives and tell them to be supportive. The president is saying we need to create jobs. Help him get jobs bill through the Congress. Help him to clean up the environment and protect the country from climate change and global warming. We got to use the social media. We didn't have, during the height of the civil rights movement, we didn't have social media. So young people especially, but all of us, need to be in tune, in email, do whatever we can, write letters, make telephone calls, sign petitions, send to our senators, send to our members of the House of Representatives, write letters to the media, to the press, email, and send to people, you too can make a contribution. You too can be involved. Don't stand on the sideline.
Congressman Lewis, I was researching the March on Washington, and I came across where you were preparing the night before your speech, and you were called in to a boardroom to discuss your speech, to kind of tone it down. Take us back to the day before the speech, and tell us about that experience, and also tell us, looking at it today, do you regret toning down your speech?
Well, the night before, we all had to make advanced copies of our speeches available. And someone thought that my speech was a little too strong, a little too militant, a little too radical. And a note was placed under my door at the hotel where we always stand, saying that I should come to this boardroom. And I went to the meeting, and there were some people who thought that the speech was too militant, too radical. But in the beginning of the speech, I said, in good conscience, we cannot support the administration's civil rights bill, but it was too little and it was too late. I went on to say there's not anything in this bill that will protect old women and young children involved in peaceful, non-violent protests, run down by policemen on horsebacks and chased by police dogs. And some people said you got to support the bill, but we didn't go to Washington to support a particular piece of civil rights legislation. It was a march for jobs and freedom. But then down in the body of the speech, I used the word revolution, the phrase black masses or masses, and some people said, what do you mean by that? In another part of the speech, I said, I want to know which side of the federal government on. And then later on in the speech, I said, the party of Kennedy is the party of Eastland. Where is our party? And the party of Jarvis, a liberal senator from New York, is the party of Goldwater, the conservative senator from Arizona. But then near the end of the speech, I said something like, if we do not see meaningful progress here today, the day will come where we will not confine our marching on Washington, but we may be forced to march through the South the way Sherman did, nonviolently. They said, oh, John, you can't say that. You can't, that's really inflammatory. And we made the other changes, but we left that reference to Sherman there. And even after the program started the next day and the music was going, that part was still there. And Dr. King came to me and said, John, that doesn't sound like you. And Mr. Randolph, A. Philip Randolph, man, I love and respect it. I admire Dr. King. He was my hero, my inspiration. I couldn't say no to Dr. King. I couldn't say no to A. Philip Randolph. And we made the changes. But I said to some of the leaders that night, I said, this speech represents the people that we have been working with in the heart of the South. They represent the young people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. When I look back on it, I don't regret the changes because people saw or heard about the original text and the word still got out there what I wanted to say.
Wow, wow. Congressman Lewis, I want to read to you, during your speech you stated that the revolution is at hand and we must free ourselves of the chains of political and economic slavery. The nonviolent revolution is saying we will not wait for the courts to act, for we have been waiting hundreds of years. We will not wait for the President, nor Justice Department, nor Congress, but we will take matters into our own hand and create a great source of power outside of any national structure that could and would assure us victory. In that quote, I want to ask you, is it time for another march on Washington, given the verdict of George Zimmerman?
Oh, I think it is time for us to march on Washington again. And we're going to. We're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary. Dr. King said on one occasion, there's not anything more powerful than the marching feet of a determined people. I've been very pleased. I've been gratified to see all of the people, especially young people, all over America, in their own communities, their own neighborhoods, protesting about what happened in this case. It's time for people to march. It's time for people to vent their discontent and their frustration. Even in a city like Atlanta, just a few short days ago, more than 800 motorcycle bike riders gathered at the state capitol. They came from all over using their own bikes to protest. That's a good thing. They did it in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion.
Wow, amazing. Congressman Lewis, tell us, what do you see the next generation of our country heading? Are we heading in a good direction?
Oh, I think we're headed in a good and necessary direction. There may be some setbacks. There may be some disappointments. There may be some interruption. But I tell you, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that we're going to make it as a nation and as a people. We're not going back, and we're not going to stand still. What we do in America could serve as a model for the rest of the world. I think we got to have comprehensive immigration reform and let more than 11 million people come out of the shadow and set them on a path to citizenship. America in a few short years will be so different. It's going to be brighter. The minority will be the majority. With the growing African American population and the Latino population, the Asian American population, we are on our way toward the creation of a truly multiracial democratic society.
In saying that, Congressman Lewis, what about the atmosphere in Congress with the president? It seems Republicans won't pass anything he puts forth. How do Democrats overturn that?
It's time for Democrats to wake up, to speak out, and find a way to get in the way. When I was growing up in rural Alabama many, many years ago as a little boy, and I would see those signs that said white waiting, colored waiting, white men, colored men, white women, colored women. I would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grand, why? And they would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But I was inspired when I heard of Rosa Parks, when I heard of Martin Luther King Jr., to get in the way, to get in trouble. And I got in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. It's time for us to get in trouble again. And said to the people who are trying to stop this president, and I'm talking about Democrats, I think we're too quiet. We need to make some noise and get in good trouble.
Yes, I love that. I love that saying of yours, Congressman Lewis. From time to time, I'm watching some of your speeches, and I look back, and as I travel across the state of Mississippi, I encourage young people to get in trouble, good trouble, rally for a cause greater than themselves. And I believe that your life has been a testament of getting in trouble, good trouble, and as a result of that, you've made a very big impact in our country. As it relates to the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, tell us about the events that are lined up that day. What's going to happen and how people can get involved and come out and support.
Well, on August 24th, just a few weeks from now, it is my hope that people will come from all over America. And some people who are now living abroad do the same thing that another group of citizens did 50 years ago. There were people living in Europe, living in Africa and Asia. They came home to march on Washington. I want to see people come and rally. There are going to be all type of meetings, programs at the Lincoln Memorial, at the King Monument, at the Washington Monument. People have an opportunity to come to Capitol Hill and visit with some of the members if they're there, if not with their staffers. But we will be petitioning Congress and the President, not just to celebrate and to commemorate, but to recognize the distance we've come, the progress we've made, and the distance we still must travel. Because in America today, 50 years later, there's still hundreds and thousands and millions of our citizens without jobs. We need to see that all of our young people get jobs and get a great education.
Many Americans believe that gay rights is not a civil rights issue. What is your opinion on that? And what can we do as a country to move forward and progress in that particular area?
I've taken a strong position for many, many years. You cannot be for civil rights or for human rights and not be for gay rights. I've taken a position that I fought too long and too hard against discrimination based on race and color, not to be against discrimination based on sexual orientation. During another period in our history, especially during the 50s and the early 60s, when people would ask Dr. King about interracial marriage, he would always say, races don't fall in love and get married. Individuals fall in love and get married. So if two men or two women want to fall in love and get married, it's their business. And no government, state or federal, should tell individuals who they can fall in love with and get married. It's not the place for the government to say so. If we believe in equality under the law, if we believe in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, it must be equality for all.
Congressman Lewis, where do you see, in the next 50 years, where do you see equality and blacks in America?
During the next few years, within 50 years, those that are still here, when they read the history book or turn the pages of history, but I think even before the next 50 years, we're going to look back and say, why were we so silly? We should have been ashamed of ourselves. I think we're going to laugh at ourselves. What was the fuss all about? And I think each generation, you're going to see improvement. Things are going to get better. The signs that I saw when I was growing up, they're gone. And they will not return. The only places our children and children yet to be born will see those signs will be in a book in a museum, on a video. We got to catch up with our own humanity and recognize the dignity and the worth of every human being. We're going to lay down the burden of race, and we're going to lay down the burden of discriminating against someone because of gender or sexual orientation.
Congressman Lewis, what do you want the next generation to remember about the March on Washington?
I would like for the next generation to remember that the March on Washington was an orderly, peaceful assembly of more than 250,000 Americans. They were black and white, Latino, Asian American, Native American. They were gay, they were straight. There were people of faith. There were people who believed in themselves, who believed in the future, that were not prepared to give up or to take no for an answer. They were there to petition that government for a better America, for an America where everybody was included, but no one was left out or left behind.
Congressman Lewis, finally, as we wrap up today, what would be some components that you would share with us to keep the fight going, as you said earlier, to get in trouble and get in good trouble? What would be your suggestion for us?
My suggestion for your generation, for your brothers and sisters, to find a way, yes, to get in the way, to find a way to make some noise, but to find a way to speak up and speak out. When you see something that is not right, something that is not fair, something that is not just, to have the feeling or the belief that you have an obligation, a mission, or mandate to be brave, to be courageous, and don't let anybody turn you around or say you cannot do it, you cannot make it.
Thank you so much, Congressman Lewis, for coming to Growth Talk today. It has been an extreme honor to have an opportunity to sit in the presence of what we call a civil rights icon in your own right. And I vow that we will take on that responsibility to rally and to get in trouble and speak loud and clear on injustice that we see in this country. Thank you so much for coming on the air today.
Thank you, sir.
The state of Mississippi, we thank you, and we look forward to what's to come for our country.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed being with you.
Thank you.